Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. With us today, we have a guest I mentioned last week. Jamie Reitenour ran for governor. Many of you know her name. Many of you may have voted for her. But with the recent ending of the primary, I wanted to have her on because she exceeded all expectations. She spent the least amount of money of any candidate, and this time, as I mentioned before, Indiana set a record for the amount of money spent in the Republican primary. $40 million was spent on that one election campaign. And as I recall, Governor Holcomb and Governor Pence spent less than 20 for their entire year, maybe around 12 if I remember right. So I'm very excited to have Jamie on with us today to talk about how she did this phenomenal feat of coming in and doing quite well with the least amount of money spent. So Jamie, it's great to have you on.
Thank you
Good to
for
see
having
you.
me.
Thanks for joining us. So before I get to your, maybe I should start off before the end. Let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
What led you to run for governor?
You know, it was really an amazing situation. My husband and I came here to Indiana. Nathan is from Michigan, and I'm from a little bit of all over because my parents were in the military, and so we had really our family and our children. Everybody was set in Michigan, and all of a sudden, we just felt in our journey that the Lord was calling us out of Michigan, and we didn't know quite where. But as we began to look for a church, my husband came home and he said one day, okay, so I've got good news. The good news is that I found a church. Bad news is you've been living in the home you're in for 2 years, and I'm going to ask you to move again. It's 3.5 hours south. And as a military brat and a person that just loves the Lord, I knew the Lord was in it, so I said, let's go to Indiana. Fun fact is that, so my husband and I, our anniversary is February 14th on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And so even before we lived in Indiana, we would be in Michigan and Illinois, and we would still come to Indiana for our anniversary because it's during that winter season, and we really just loved Indianapolis. And so the Lord always had our hearts here. So we came here to Indiana. We had a lot go on with our home. I ended up going through a lot where I had to represent our neighbors, which eventually became a court case where I represented my family. But in the midst of that, there was a whisper over my heart, and it just said, you're going to be the governor of the state of Indiana. And I just kind of thought about it, and I told my husband about it, and we just kind of looked like, it's not our family. We're not politicians. And when we drove past the governor's mansion, it was like, that definitely does not look like our family. And so I just prayed about it. I went through that entire COVID time really trying to understand where we were as a nation. I think it's such a wake-up call for the church, especially. We saw our freedoms really infringed upon no matter what side people fall on as to COVID. The real reality is that our freedoms were infringed upon. And so as we came out of that, my husband and I were just praying. We really rededicated our family to the Lord, and we said, we're going to plant our roots in Indiana. And as we did that, that calling just came off the shelf. And I ended up at Panera, and there were people 2 weeks in a row that came up to me and just exhorted me in my journey. One woman said, the Lord has put in you a love. It's a love for the people, and you're to follow that love. And then the next week, a man came up and said, you know, the Lord has called you. He told me specifically, you have a calling on your life, and you need to let your past go, and you need to allow the Lord to renew your mind that you might approve the pure and acceptable will of God. And he told me and exhorted me to walk in that calling. And so that really was where I ended up. I ended up in this place of, okay, Lord, you're calling me forward. Now it's no longer something where you're saying this is going to happen. You're actually calling me out. And so I just began to knock on doors. And that's very much how it is in the Christian walk, right? We are told to knock on doors, to ask, right? And so we began to do that. And as we knocked on doors, it just, a stirring of the brethren took place. We began to have multiple encounters that were just really unexplainable. And that's how we began building really probably one of the stronger grassroots movement that Indiana's seen.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because a lot of people want to run for governor, and they're not able to get on the ballot because it's very difficult in Indiana to get on the ballot. And you surprised people with the number of signatures you received or you obtained.
Yes.
And I know some of the candidates, I won't mention them, I could mention one who I know paid several $100,000 to get his signatures.
Right.
And so you didn't do that.
No,
you
we
went out
did
and got
not.
signatures. But tell our audience, if they don't know, about the signature process in Indiana.
Right. So that is a very important process to understand. So in the state of Indiana, we know that you have to be not only do you have to get signatures, but you have to get signatures in every single district. So there's 9 congressional districts, and you're required to get 500 signatures in every congressional district. Not only do you have to get 500 signatures in every congressional district, but it also has to be a registered voter. That's where it gets difficult because you can ask a person for a signature, but then when it comes to actually checking, are they a registered voter? Then you're dealing with the state database, and some of them are county databases are updated, and some of the county databases are not updated. And so we really went through a lot of fine tuning during the signature process. And what we did is we just went out and we shared the message. It's very important for people to understand that we live in a time where what is most important is the message. I run knowing that I love Jesus and that I believe the Bible is the wisdom this country needs. And so when we communicate the message clearly, it makes it easier for people to get on board. And so we began collecting signatures in all of these districts, and we actually, instead of having to go through and count which is a registered voter and which isn't, because we went through like one day of doing that and thought this is ridiculous because the databases weren't updated. We just said, let's get as many signatures as we can, just in case they don't count some. And we actually ended up gathering 10,000 signatures.
Wow.
But they did not count 4,000 of them. And so they ended up saying that we had 6,000 signatures of registered voters. We were only required to get 4,500. And so that's how we met that requirement.
Well, there have been many candidates who, particularly in Marion County, couldn't get the 500, and Todd Young had to go to court because he was within 2 votes in the county. But you blew past that.
We did. You know, we made sure to make, like, I live in Marion County, so that's one thing that's helpful. But I also think that we communicated that the message is about the people. So the principles that hold up the Conservative Party are principles that I believe in. They're principles that my family and we go by. And so when you're communicating those principles to people and you're doing so clearly, it's not just Republicans that were signing for us.
Right.
Democrats, independents, libertarians, they understood that we were coming forward and saying, enough is enough. There's enough of the politics in this country. Politics is really killing the country. It's squeezing out what is good about us. And so what we said is, let's highlight the goodness. And we ran on Indiana goodness, and we really saw so much success and excitement because people are ready to make a stand.
So you get on the ballot, probably surprise a lot of what we would call the political establishment, the professional politicians, the media, people who watch politics, the political junkies. What was the reaction when you got on the ballot?
Right. So that's really
I think
interesting.
there were a lot of people who didn't think, oh, who is this lady? She's not going to make it.
Right.
And you blew past the numbers. And if I remember right, you got on the ballot pretty early.
Well, we turned in around the same time that Eric Doden did.
Who had been running a lot longer than you.
Yeah. They they're putting kind of money behind their signature run, and we're out and we're doing it all through a grassroots effort. I think we were maybe second to last to turn in. I'm not sure if Curtis came behind us or not. But I can say that, the name will remain nameless, but I did hear a person that came forward and said they had talked to one of the other campaigns. And when they were working for the campaign, this specific person had said they had called the Republican Party and said, hey, did you know there's this other woman that's running? And the word on the street was that someone at the Republican Party said she'll never make the ballot. And so I think it was very obvious that they thought they could squeeze out people that are just everyday people. And the reality is that our country is stronger than that. And that's really what we have to realize as Christians, as people that believe that we're the salt of the earth, the city on a hill. We have to be shrewd and realize that we are much stronger than they know. Our country is a beautiful country. It is full of goodness. We know that the Bible talks about, right, that I would have lost heart had I not believed. I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And so we're in a time right now where I think just even through the grassroots that I've brought forward, we are showing and proving that people are ready to stand. We are not going to allow the party politics to squeeze out what is good, which is really the family.
Yeah. Well, you raised what I would consider a small amount for even a state representative race.
Sure.
But you overexceeded expectations. Once you got on the ballot, what was your message then? What were your top 2 or 3 campaign issues that you either heard about when your campaign or were in your heart that you wanted to talk about?
Right. Well, I think that you have to start with life. I think that, I'm a candidate that believes that life begins at conception, but I'm also someone that believes in the whole life of the person. And so when you start talking about life, you're going to end up going right into the family. The family is being targeted in the United States right now. And so then when you look at the family, you can't help but end up in education. And so that really was our primary platform. We really emphasized on education. We have a failing education department in the state of Indiana that really hasn't just failed, just from a statistical standpoint when you look at all the testing that's going on, but what the state is doing is failing families. And so we made that our focus. Paige Miller joined, and she was amazing and really kept us focused on what it is that we can do to make Indiana what we would call the training capital of the United States. And so we really see that in Indiana's future. And then right after that, I would say that the issues I saw on the ground were tied between government overreach and property taxes. And so that was kind of like a hand in hand. We were obviously dealing with Link 101, which we were happy to see by me coordinating with the people in District 9 that were dealing with that Link 101 issue. We were able to put enough pressure on the state that the state came out and made a public statement that they had canceled Link 101. So for people that don't know...
explain what that is to our audience.
Sure, absolutely. So Link 101 was a highway that was supposed to be put in. It was something that Holcomb had said that he would spend $200 million towards originally, but then that estimate was based on another highway that didn't have the same terrain issues that this new highway would have. So they were thinking that that was already low. And then we came out, the Department of Transportation came out and said with inflation it was going to be 69% more.
Wow.
And all of that was going to be spent to save 6 to 8 minutes. The current highway that they were using was actually in the last 5 years, had no fatalities. And so it really was a case of government overreach, and it was oppressing the people. Here you have farms and homes and just all of these people that have gathered around in community, and really it's been going on for almost a decade, just this desire to put this highway in. And they were so discouraged because the state had no representative that they could talk to. There was no one that was really taking the project and moving it forward under their name, and yet they were seeing in their communities the steps were going forward. No one was listening to them crying out. The many signatures they got, they put a report together that was phenomenal. They had all the details. They knew exactly what they were talking about. And so what I did is I just met with them and I listened to their reasoning, and I said, okay, I'm going to bring that message to the gubernatorial stage. And when I do, you guys be ready to educate the people of the state of Indiana on what's going on. And so they did that perfectly, and that pressure, we believe, did play a role in the state coming out and saying that Link 101 was now canceled and was going to be stopped. So we were so excited about that. It was wonderful. And then, of course, we have the LEAP project that we're always watching, the Midwest corridor as well. So there were a lot of things where you saw all around the state of Indiana that politicians have just become too prideful. They're using their positions and their titles as ways to push forward agendas that are not good for the people. And so it was my role to make sure that they understood that not only are we coming forward to say it's wrong, we're coming forward to change it.
I had a board member tell me one time, who was a city councilor for years and years, I won't mention him, but people will know him quite well, but he said to me, the problem with politicians is when we elect them, they want to do something. And sometimes they want to do something without looking at whether or not it's even beneficial to do.
That's right.
And so, and I'd love to see a top-down review of all of state government to say, is this really worth the money we're spending? Are we getting the results we want? And education is one of those, but every agency, I think, needs to be more accountable, because that's how private industry tends to work better.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. When you look at the talk on the stump at the time that we lost $1 billion, right? And I would always sit there and go, I mean, like, at what point in time did they say we probably should talk about this?
Right.
You know, like, are
Right.
you at the 500,000 mark
Right.
and you're like, it's just
let's wait till it's
500, you
billion.
know, 500 million.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
just 500. Well, we reached a billion.
Yeah.
Now we want to, I mean, it really is a time where audits are our friend, and we think that government needs to go through a few audits. We think the Department of Education would do well to do that. But I think what you'll also find when you go through audits is that money is being spent in places it shouldn't be, and it's not being spent in places it should.
Yeah.
And so that's why we need leaders that are not about themselves and pushing their own agendas, but are about the people.
Well, there's an old saying that nobody spends other people's money as wisely as they spend their own. And
So
that's
true.
That's true with government. So you get on the ballot, you're out there campaigning, you've got your issues, and then you start to get some attention, and the debates come along, and you're shut out of the debates. How did that, was that a blessing in disguise? I mean, did it get your name out there more, or how did you turn lemon into lemonade with that? Because I know that was,
Yeah.
and I think that was totally unfair. I think voters need to know everyone who's running
Absolutely.
in the primary. Don't say, well, we predict these people aren't going to make it, so we're going to focus on these. That's the media choosing our candidates for us.
That's right.
So, but you did exceptionally well in the debates you were in. I listened to a couple of them. You present well, you speak well. But what happened to your support when your supporters found out that you're not in the first debate?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's where we just dig into the scriptures and we look at what the Word of God says, right? The Bible tells us that what the enemy is working for evil, the Lord will work for good. And I think that that's really what we saw in that case. They would have probably been wiser not to not include me, because it did cause a stir.
News stories too.
Yeah. It caused a fluttering of news stories. But I think that really what we have to do, even before we look at the debate scenario, is we really have to examine the Republican Party, because for the Republican Party to go quiet when an African American or an American that is black comes forward and says, hey, I've been a Republican my entire life.
Right.
Both of my parents have served in the military, and I believe in the Republican principles. For them to ignore that opportunity really says a lot about our party.
It does.
And I think that it's important for people to understand that when you're in business and you believe in the product that you are selling, you will go to people and communicate the necessity of that product. And so when you've got a party that is not looking at the opportunity to communicate to a new voting group, hey, this is someone that you might identify with that also has all of these principles, all of these values, this is a great time for you to join us so that we can stand together in our communities. The fact that they completely ignored that opportunity, I think, says so much about how much they actually believe in what they're standing for. And so I think that's the first thing that has to be addressed, is people need to look at people that are calling themselves the head of the Republican Party and ask the question, are they really taking the principles you believe in and trying to put those out into community? You know, a fun fact is in the 2020 race, we really saw, you know, a lot of people that were supporting President Trump. But if you go back into 2016 in the state of Indiana, we had that primary race that was really heated. And when you look at the kind of voters that were coming out, you see that there was over 550,000 that voted for President Trump. And then you had like 400, and I think it was 80 or so that voted for Cruz. And then you just kept going down, Kasich, and then Carson. Where did those people go? All of a sudden, we're in a primary where we've got about 20%, 25% turnout. And we're looking at numbers that easily could be explained when it comes to maybe the traditional party people that are really in the know of the party. But where did that other 500,000 go? Again, that's where you go back to party leadership and you ask the question, why are we letting voters get away?
Do you think it's messaging of the candidates, or do you think it's more that the party didn't really care if there were that many people voting because they wanted a certain outcome? Or do you think it was just a lack of messaging that didn't draw those people in? Or was it because Trump was already maybe the nominee?
I think it's
assumed?
I think it's probably all of the above in some ways, but I really do point specifically to the party, because it's the party's job to ensure that their candidates have a good platform in the state.
Yeah.
And so, if you're running the party in the state of Indiana, you should be very familiar with all the news stations. You should be very familiar with all of the universities that align with your values. You should have those people on speed dial. And you should be looking for as many opportunities as possible to get all of your candidates on the stage. And I think that one of the things that I found very disappointing when the news media came out and said, well, here are your qualifiers to get in the debate. You have to raise this amount of money, and you have to have 5%, which of course we proved later that we did have 5%. But where was the party? Where was that opportunity to say, hey, wait a second, time out. We have some very iron sharpening iron conversations going on here. We want the public to see this, and we want all our candidates to be involved. So I think part of it was the responsibility of the party to make sure that they facilitate an environment for the messaging. And then I think the other side of that coin was the messaging. And of course, when it came to ourselves, Facebook had completely blocked us. We were not allowed to boost any of our posts. And so what we saw was that when people interacted with our messaging, we had an incredible amount of people that jumped on board. So our percentages were really high when people actually heard the message. And so I think it's a learning experience. It helps us understand that as conservatives, we need to focus on the messaging, because there is a battle right now, and it is in the messaging. And so we have to ask, if we're the salt of the earth, how are we taking our beliefs and our faith and going out and impacting the world? And so, yes, I think that it was quite an incredible experience. Getting involved in the debates was, I think, a real highlight. I really enjoyed being on the stage with the other candidates. I think that it's just good for all of us to talk about the issues that the people care about. And I think it's really good to come off stump and not constantly be repeating the exact same thing. So I traveled with the candidates for a little while in different time periods. A lot of it was spent on the ground. And it would just be, it's hard whenever you realize the question's coming and then there's like the same exact things that you're going to hear every single time. But I think that we're past that as a country. I think we're past that as Hoosiers. I think Hoosiers want a real conversation, and I think that's what the debates provided. And the attention I got from not being involved, I think, was just the Lord working it for good.
Well, you were not involved in negative campaign. There was obviously some negative campaign. That always happens. I'm just curious, when you were getting ready for the debate or when you were at events together, was there any type of camaraderie between you and the other candidates? I know I talked to Curtis Hill and Eric Doden and others. Nobody said a bad word about you. I know Curtis liked you a lot, but was there this odd thing on the inside that we didn't see on the outside? We got this negative mail, but was there... I'm just curious. I've never asked a candidate that.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Did they accept you as a candidate, do you think?
I think so. I mean, they're just people.
Right.
So, I mean, we all tie our shoes the same way. So, when it comes down to it, they're just people. And I think that, there were a few candidates. There was one in particular where I had a bit of an iron sharpening iron moment because I believe in truth. And I think messaging, when you say something, you need to make sure that what you're saying is true. And so there were a few comments that were made that weren't quite true. I was not one to say that I was the only conservative candidate. I was one to say that, I believe in the Bible. I believe in the truth of the Bible. And I think there was another candidate out there that was kind of trying to rival for that position, and so was trying to convince people they were the only person that was acting that way, and that just wasn't true. And so I did make a point to make sure that they understood that, when we say that we're Christians, you don't get a pass just because you're in politics to say something that's not true. You're actually held to a different set. You're not operating under Indiana. When you call yourself a Christian, you're operating under the Word of God. And so we had a conversation about that. But other than that, I think that, behind closed doors, everybody was very cordial. I am not a fake person at all. I'm not going to say that they're fake. I'm just going to say that it's clearly political behind closed doors. I tend to be the kind of person that says, even if you're paying someone to talk about me, like, it's still you, right?
So you made the decision.
So let's have real conversation. So I think that I think all in all, there was the most negativity that took place was probably really pointed to Braun. And I think, rightly so. I think there were some issues that he had come out and said from a senator standpoint that just, you can't say those things. You can't talk against the police. You can't support a group like Black Lives Matter. And you can't say you're going to do it and then run away from it, because that doesn't help either. So you got to be really honest with the people. You got to come forth. The Bible says, out of the abundance of your heart, the mouth speaks. And so I think that's quite a statement for people that are in politics, right? But yeah, I think behind closed doors, I guess you could really call attention to that last debate that we did. That was quite interesting behind closed doors, because I think all of us as candidates were back there just kind of expecting the typical professional courtesy of lining up and being in the right order. And they weren't doing that behind closed doors. It was very clear that there was kind of something amiss. And so then, of course, we got out there on the stage, and it was like, okay, what is going on?
Yeah, the moderator was very aggressive, and
he was. It felt like debating the moderator, right? He took he had his own spot on the stage. So I think that Hoosiers see through that. But yeah, I would say, Indiana does have what probably most states have, and that's just kind of like a political professional courtesy. Whether or not that's what's going on the inside, I don't know. But when I'm on stage and I call people out, I am the same on stage as I am in backstage. And the reality is that it is my hope that people would see the light of Christ. It is my hope that they would just hear the good news and be drawn to the Lord as Savior. I have an eternal focus, and I desire to hear the Lord say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And so when I would call people out on the stage, I tried to really emphasize on truth. It is very important that people understand truth about others. We are not electing people on stump. We are electing their belief system.
Right.
And that's what it's important to recognize.
Well, I want to ask you two more questions before we close. Your hat, Moms for Liberty.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because you were out there more than I was, obviously, in the work I do, but is the issue of parental rights and parental involvement in education and parents being concerned about maybe transgender bathrooms or content in the classroom or sexual education that's inappropriate, is that still a hot issue out there?
It is a hot issue, and you'll find it in the general election. So that is, again, a very big concern, and it goes back to the party, the heads of the party, the leaders of our party. What we need to be asking ourselves is, we know that that's a big issue. Why aren't they talking about it? That is, it really is the difference in understanding. As a leader, I understand that it is my responsibility to bring up the issues that matter to the people. And the fact that we've got people that are in conservative leadership that are abandoning and kind of going silent on these issues while they creep into our culture, and really they're making huge strides, right? So we know Josh Hirschberger was working on a case with parental rights, and now there's a case out there that's actually provides a case precedent where this family had their child taken from them, that they disagreed with the gender that the child was now choosing, and instead of them being told, it's your child, the courts came out and said there was no negligence. The courts actually justified the state taking the child out of the home. That's case precedent. And so that is an alarm bell. That's something that all of the party heads should be saying, hey, wait, we're the conservatives in the state. We believe in family. We've got to talk about these issues. How about we tell the news? We want you to ask about these issues. But that's not what we saw, and that's not what we saw from the stage either. And so what we tried to do is really emphasize on education and make sure that people knew that parental rights was an issue that they needed to get involved in. But even more importantly, the general election, you're going to see that, because Jennifer McCormick is going to bring that up, because she ties that into her position on life. And so it's just kind of an irony that the person that's going to bring this so valuable conversation to the stage is a person that isn't a conservative leader. Yeah.
Well, that was my last question, so you transitioned to that perfectly.
Sure.
After the election, you haven't quit. I mean, you went on to do one more debate than the other four or other Republican candidates did. You debated Jennifer McCormick.
I sure did.
Before Mike Braun's going to. Tell us about that. That was very bold of you, and she made this offer to debate anybody on the life issue, and you took her up on it. So tell us about that.
I sure did. She put my name on a chair. She put my name on a chair. So yeah, we just felt like the timing was right. You know, life is so precious, and you either believe that or you don't. And I think that when people make an affront to life, they're not speaking about myself. They're speaking about the creator of life. And so what it really came down to for me was not, you know, is this a political thing that I should do, as much as it came down to, you know what, this person is calling out our beliefs on life. And we have to be those that say, we're not just going to stand for life when it's convenient. We're going to stand for life all the time, in the midst of the fire, because we know that what we're standing for is true. And so I accepted her. We didn't quite know if it was going to work out until like the last minute, but I accepted her invitation. We were going to show up no matter what. I was just going to walk up and be like, give me that piece of paper. I'm here, I'm sitting in my chair. But it was a really good debate. I felt like the moderator in that time was very unbiased. The Lord gave grace.
Good.
Right? The Lord gave grace. He gives grace to his people. And so in a room that was rather heated, I was able to communicate that, you know what, when it comes to life, you've got to ask yourself, you know, does life have value? You start there.
Yeah.
Does life have value? Can we all agree? Can we all just, the Bible says, come, let us reason together.
Yeah.
Does life have value? And then whenever you answer that question, which is a resounding yes, because who's going to say life doesn't have value? You know, one of the things that you'll see at the Indianapolis Zoo, if they still have the kangaroo exhibit, I went into that exhibit and they had this little stand and there was a sign up and it said, this display, and it said that the kangaroo, the embryo, comes out after about 30 days and then nestles down in its mother's pouch and grows there for 8 months outside of the womb. Amazing. And I thought to myself, isn't this incredible that the zoo is promoting this itty bitty embryo that comes out and goes and is in this pouch for 8 months, and yet here we are saying that human life doesn't have value.
Right.
Where have we gone as a culture? And so we went to ask the question, does life have value? And then once we asked that question, then the obvious next question is, when does life begin?
Yeah.
And once we got those questions out, and I explained to everyone that we really do see that life begins at conception. From that point forward, you're really just dealing with a matter of disagreeing on the foundational principles of life. And so I pointed out to them that 78% of Planned Parenthoods are in minority neighborhoods. And I said, you know, whenever minorities are saying, hey, we don't feel represented, you might want to consider your representation, because 34 million minority babies have been killed. And so these are things that are important to bring up, because it allows us to see what's really taking place. When we peel back the curtain and we say, wow, there's an assault on life, there's an assault on the family, there's an assault on small businesses. When we start to look at that, we see that there truly is an enemy that's coming against this nation. And when that happens, the righteous have to stand.
Well, I'm reminded of when NASA and the government spend billions of dollars to go to Mars looking for some tiny speck of amoeba.
Exactly.
And they declare life on Mars, which they haven't found yet, but they can't declare life in the womb when it's all there.
Exactly.
And science tells us that's life.
Oh, that's absolutely true. The Bible tells us, the Lord tells us, right, that even before we were formed in our mother's womb, He knew us.
Yeah.
And so I just love that. That's such a great reminder. Why are we looking for life on other planets? You've got life right here.
Well, I appreciate this. Appreciate you coming to join us today. You know, your story about going debating the Democrat nominee Jennifer McCormick, who was the superintendent of public instruction under Eric Holcomb.
Yes.
was a Republican and had voted Democrat in the past, now running as Democrat for governor.
Yes.
I'm reminded when David came down as a shepherd boy, and Goliath is taunting the Philistines are taunting the Israelites. David looks around and says, "Why are you letting this happen? Is there not a cause?"
Yes.
And he stands up and says, "I'll take on Goliath." And you did that. You know, the other candidates didn't show up to debate on life, but you did. So thank you for doing that.
Yes, and we'll continue to. We definitely are those that say, "Is there not a cause?"
Well, I appreciate you staying engaged. Appreciate you joining us today. And it's good to meet you. We've met before, but it's great to have you on just to talk about how you exceeded expectations. I know you had plans about word of mouth. You had, what was it called, the 12-12-12 plan?
Yeah.
And obviously that worked because you did quite well on about $60,000, whereas the one right ahead of you, Eric Doden, spent $9 million. And so just astonishing that you did so well. But there's something
Micah.
there. You obviously resonated with voters. And
Yes.
so appreciate you coming on, let people know who you are.
Absolutely. We always tell everybody the best is yet to come.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you appreciate that. I hope that gave you some insight into one of the candidates who you may have heard about. And appreciate you watching today. Hope you have a wonderful weekend and a great Memorial Day holiday as well. With time with your family, remembering those who've sacrificed and lost their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy today. Again, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us.